So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Entrepreneurship Center here at the Field Center. My name is Gary Smalls. I am the program coordinator here at the Field Center. And we are thankful for you joining us for today's Entrepreneurial Lunch and Learn offered by the Lawrence N. Field Center for Entrepreneurship here at Baruch College. The Field Center for Entrepreneurship is a multifaceted division here at Baruch College offering free services and programs for the entrepreneurial community. Today's Lunch and Learn webinar is presented today by Mark Goldsmith. He is the founder of Getting Out and Staying Out. Getting Out and Staying Out is a nonprofit organization which supports previously incarcerated young men of color's transition back to society through education, employment, and mental health programming. GOSO's work is framed by their 3 E's: education, employment, and emotional well-being. They believe that all 3 work together to form a foundation on which GOSO's participants can build their future. They seek to help each participant imagine a life beyond sustainable employment and to guide them towards a challenging and rewarding career through education and training. So thank you so much for being with us today, Mark. Please feel free to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself before you get started.
All right. So good afternoon. I am Mark Goldsmith and the author of the book From Madison Avenue to Rikers Island, The Making of a Social Entrepreneur. This book is part memoir, but also part how to start a not-for-profit. So my story goes back a little history. I grew up in a small Western Pennsylvania town, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I was not a very good student. I went to Penn State for a couple of years because they had to take me because I was a state resident. But after 2 years, the dean and I had a meeting and he told me, Mr. Goldsmith, one of us has to leave Penn State and it's not going to be me. I said, aha, I think I just flunked out of Penn State. So I joined the Navy. And the first time I saw New York City was from a destroyer. I went topside. And there was New York City versus Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And I decided this is where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So I went back home, but before I left Johnstown, I went to a going away party and I got drunk and I hit a cop car and I ended up being locked up. I can still hear that cell door closing behind me. And my father had to come down and bail me out. And of course, had I been of color in New York City, I would have ended up on Rikers Island with a bail that I could not afford. And just as a note, in the 15 years on Rikers that I was there, not one guy that I worked with ever bailed out. We're finally working on that bail system. My case was closed and I eventually did make it to New York. I went back to school, got my BA from NYU and my MBA from Baruch. My first job was actually with Pfizer, who had just bought a cosmetic company called Coty. I doubled my salary from $6,000 to $12,000, and I was definitely a hero when I got home that night. When I eventually left Coty, I asked them why they had hired me in the first place. They said it was because I was going to enroll in an MBA program at Baruch, and I had asked them if they would also pay for it. So needless to say, Baruch has always been very near and dear to me. My career on Madison Avenue in New York City started at Coty. I then went to Revlon, but before and after that, I built a fragrance business. I don't know if any of you know the men's cologne called Brut Cologne, but I was very instrumental in building that. Then I ran Yves Saint Laurent's fragrance business, then a Japanese company called Shiseido. And finally, I ran Almay's hypoallergenic cosmetics for about 10 years. After that, I formed my own bartering and trading company called Inventory Management. We actually traded excess inventory for advertising at a rate that produced a profit rather than a loss. I had really finally become a true entrepreneur. Now, about that time, approximately 20 years ago, at the age of 66, my wife suggested that I be part of a program in New York City called Principal for the Day. You go into a high school and you talk to kids about their future. Being a bit of a wise guy, I asked for the toughest school in New York, and I got it. There was a high school on Rikers Island called the Horizon Academy, and that's where I was assigned. My first day on Rikers, what was I going to talk about? I figured I'd be a wise guy, so I talked about Tupac Shakur and Kobe Bryant for about a half hour to let these guys know that the white dude does know something about their world. And I basically gained their interest. I asked them what they were going to do when they got out, and none of them had a clue. Probably go back to the same street corner that they used to hang out in, maybe sell a few drugs here and there, so they had some pocket money. I asked them if they had ever heard about General Motors, and they said, yeah, about cars. And I said, and cars have to be sold. Do any of you guys know how to sell? Oh man, we know how to sell, Mr. G. I said, and by the way, who handles the money here? Oh, this guy over here, he handles it. That's called finance. And I said, and who selects the gang members? Oh, that guy over there. I said, that's called personnel. They were all shocked to hear that the skills that they already possessed could get them a legitimate job that they wouldn't be arrested at. The correction officer said that they had never listened to any speaker for over an hour, and I felt good about that, and I went back to work. 1 year later, I went back to principal for the day, and they told me they were sending me back to Rikers Island because my talk there was so well received. And this time I decided to come more often. Little did I know that my corporate entrepreneur days were about to come to an end. I started going back to Rikers once a week, then twice a week. And then one of the guys beat his case. I said, oh my God, where am I going to see him? So one of my chapters is from Rikers Island to Starbucks on the corner of 39th Street and Madison Avenue, where I drank quite a few cafe lattes. Before we continue, a little perspective here. For those of you who might be thinking of entering the social service business and being entrepreneurial at it, there is a dramatic difference between that world and the corporate world. It's called making a profit versus making a difference. Milton Friedman said it best: the purpose of a business is to make a profit. The purpose of a not-profit is to make a positive influence in people's lives. So before we move into the actual forming of my not-for-profit, I need to talk to you about a special word, and that is passion. The importance of passion in the not-for-profit cannot be underestimated. In the business world, it's different. You don't necessarily need passion. You just want to know exactly how you're going to make money, which is the objective. Considering the obstacles you will face in the not-for-profit world, you can't make it without passion. So that's the preamble. Let's move on to actually creating a not-for-profit. It starts off with naming the agency. It should describe the business that you're going to be in. So I thought about it for a little while and I said, well, let me see, how about getting out and staying out? That's what I really wanted these guys to do. And so that became the name of the agency, Getting Out and Staying Out. After that, you come up with something called a mission statement. And my mission statement obviously revolved around recidivism. And over the 15 years that I ran Getting Out and Staying Out, we reduced the recidivism rate from over 65% to under 15. Recidivism definition being those guys who went back to Rikers or prison. You then create a legal tax entity called a 501c3, which allows people to donate to you and get a tax deduction. There was one statement that I always used when it came to spending money or time, and that was Getting Out and Staying Out was going to be all about the guys, not me, not the board of directors, not social workers. Every penny that we spent was going to be driven towards supporting the clients. Next is to have your clients speak out on behalf of your agency. My GOSO guys speak out in the book, They speak out at our benefit every year. And it's very important to have your clients talk in public. They're actually a more powerful voice than you are. It was mentioned before, the 3 E's, education, employment, and emotional well-being. The first 2 are obvious, but the third one's the most important. And that is, in order to deal with the trauma that these guys have been through, I only hired MSWs, Masters of Social Work, who could do a form of therapy with them. Overcoming obstacles. There was one obstacle after another. First obstacle I had was finding an office. I knew I wanted to be in the community rather than in a big office downtown. So I started looking for an office, but nobody wanted to rent to me because they didn't want former inmates walking through the halls of their building. So what's the answer? The answer was very simple. Get a storefront. Get yourself a storefront, put up a gate, and make sure that the entrance is right from the street. So that's how I did it. Just an example of overcoming adversity. Hiring the right people, extremely important. People who you know are interested in the subject matter and hopefully have some background to it. So the selection of staff is very, very important. Your board of directors, another important facet of your agency. I had no shame. I actually found one of my board members at a funeral for my favorite uncle. We started to talk, and the next thing you know, he ended up being on my board. So that becomes very important, the board of directors. Fundraising, how do you make money? How do you produce funds to start an agency? There's 3 or 4 major ways. Number one is government. You have city, state, and federal. You have foundations which specialize in certain problems. You have individuals, and then you run something called a benefit every year. In the staffing area, one of the things that I did was every job before I hired somebody, I wanted to know what each job would entail. So I made sure I knew every position, because remember, I was doing this alone. Finance and legal services, that was the easier part. Legal services you can get on retainer, and finance, you just hire some good people who know the numbers. Next section is very important, PR, lobbying, and marketing. You got to learn how to deal with celebrities and tell stories. And I'm particularly good at that. I can tell stories about Muhammad Ali when I was running the Brute fragrance, and Muhammad came in my office one day. He said, "What's up, MG?" I said, "Well, the advertising agency's here to do the ad." Muhammad said, "Don't worry about it. I already did the ad." I said, "What's the ad?" "Well, I'm in my bathroom and I'm shaving. I yell at my honey, 'Bring me my Brute.' Nothing happens. 'Bring me my Brute.' Nothing happens. Finally, here he comes dragging that mean old Sonny List into my bathroom. He said, 'I don't want that ugly old Brute. I want my Brute from Fabergé.'" And that was it. I spent time with Joe Namath and other celebrities. So it's important in a not-for-profit that you can talk with people who can support your cause. Mariano Rivera, the great Yankee reliever, actually came to GOSO, spent time with my guys. The comedian, John Leguizamo. John's married to my daughter's best friend. He brought 2 shows to Rikers Island and actually emceed one of our benefits. I guess the most famous celebrity I've spent time with was President Trump. I got an invitation to the White House to talk to him about the Criminal Justice Reform Act. Now, a lot of my fellow workers didn't think I should go. Some people in my family didn't think I should go because we're so adverse to his politics. But I said to myself, if he's going to sign this Criminal Justice Reform Act, I'm going to Washington. So I went down and I sat at the Oval table with him, and he promised me that he would sign the Criminal Justice Reform Act, which he did sign, the only bilateral act he signed the whole time he was there. But my objective was to get that signed, and then plenty of guys got out a little early because of that act. So it's important that you become the spokesperson for the agency also. Measurements and outcomes. You know, when you're involved and you're doing good work, some people think that's enough to get money. Well, it's not. What you have to do is produce results, and those are called measurements and outcomes. I use the philosophy of return on investment. When I ask people for money, I told them exactly what they were going to get for their money. How are we going to reduce the recidivism rate? How many guys were going to get their GED? How many guys were going to get a job? And they were rather impressed because no foundation, for the most part, had ever seen a not-for-profit run by a businessman. So that worked very well. One of the other important things is volunteering. Extremely important to get volunteers. And it's also a way that you can determine what cause do you think you might want to get involved with. The easiest way to do that is volunteer at an agency that does similar type of work and do it for a period of time to make sure that you have a passion to cure that particular cause. The rewards in the end are huge. You get more out of it than the people you were serving. That is basically it. That's what my book is all about. From Rikers Island to Rikers Island from Madison Avenue. And so, as I told Gary, I thought the best part of today will be your questions and hopefully my answers. So, Gary, I'd like you to open it up for people to ask me anything that's on their mind. I'm here to answer.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So the chat is now open. So any questions that you guys would like to put in the chat, please do. Because we do have the time for the questions and we want to make sure we made time for the questions. While we wait for questions to come into the chat, I'm actually going to kick it off with a question myself. So the first question I have for you, Mark, is what were some of the most valuable skills that you brought over from your for-profit life to this now new nonprofit world? What were some of the most beneficial skills, I would say?
I think the finance and the idea of measuring outcomes, because in order to succeed, you have to raise money. And most social people go in and say what a great job they're doing and how they're helping these people get off drugs or helping these kids with various problems. What about the results? What am I going to get for my money? Foundations want to know, or government wants to know. So that ability to take a business approach to a social problem really appealed to the foundations, city and state. It's the first time they'd ever heard it done that way. I was kind of showing them the back end before I showed them the front end, so they knew exactly what they were going to get for their money. So that was extremely important. I think that having a passion for the mission was extremely important. When I went to Rikers and I met these guys, I said, these guys have just been dealt a bad deck of cards. They don't have a shot. And so if there's somebody there to help them, then I recognize how smart they were. So just getting really to understand the problem that you're looking to solve and the individuals. And then that third E, Gary, it's to set up a GED program for education, not difficult. To set up a job placement, training people for jobs, not difficult. The emotional end was the toughest. My wife is a PhD social worker, and she told me from the beginning, only hire people with a master's degree because they have to do at least a minimal amount of therapy to get these guys over the trauma that they've been through. Because if you don't, they're not going to be able to successfully compete for jobs. They're not going to be able to get their GED or high school diploma or go on to college. I hope I've answered that.
No, that was great. That was great. And it actually segues into, we have a two-part question from Muhammad in the chat. So the first part of the question is, what was the hardest part of changing an individual's mindset? With the follow-up question being, how do I best change my mindset, personal mindset, and people's mindset when it comes to important topics?
I think a person does have to have a certain interest level. If somebody is totally against giving formerly incarcerated people a shot, there's nothing you're going to be able to do. There has to be an opening. You have to find a place in their armor to pierce, to get through to them. And one of the ways I did it with President Trump, you know what impressed him? I was talking about the guys and how we educate them and get them jobs and everything else. Then I realized what would really turn him on. I said, Mr. President, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep a young man locked up in jails and prisons. My cost of getting out and staying out is only $15,000 a guy for a year. So, Mr. President, that's $15,000 versus hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he looked at me, he said, I like that, Mark. I like that a lot. So I think what you have to do is analyze who you're talking to, try and figure out what will interest them, not what interests you or not what sounds best coming out of your mouth, but knowing who you're talking to, knowing what their objectives are. I don't know if that's answered your question. I hope I have.
Yeah, that's good. You know, that really goes to the mindset, right? It's kind of hard to change someone's mindset on something that they're kind of counter to. And you mentioned something very important, being able to speak, right? Speak to something. Why is this important? You know why it's important to you, but how do I communicate why it should be important to you, right? And
Exactly.
I think that's one of the biggest parts, because many of us as entrepreneurs are very passionate about our ideas. They're very clear, they're very succinct, right? They make sense to us. But in order to move it forward, how do you then communicate that vision to others? So I think that's really important.
It's knowing your customer. You have to know the person you're talking to and understand where they're coming from. Because if you can't work with them in that way, they're just going to shut you down. And you'll never have a shot.
That's so good. I think one of the biggest things I've noticed is that there is a confusion that people will say, well, you're a nonprofit. Why are you always asking for money, right? You're a nonprofit. Why are you always talking about money? And you talked about it recently about fundraising, the importance of fundraising. Can you speak to that for those who,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The whole idea is that, of course, it costs money to do this thing, and you got to pay the people who work for you. You got to pay social workers. You got to pay. Now, I read an interesting article. Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan Chase ran an article. It was an article in the Times about the things that these guys need most when they get out is money. Because if they don't have money, they're going to get back doing the things they used to do, which got them locked up to begin with. So you got to find ways to put money in the hands of these young men. The way I did it was I set up a curriculum. They had to go through a job readiness curriculum, but I paid them to go through the curriculum so that each time they came, they got paid. That costs money. But people wonder why these guys don't continue with their programs or the like. They've got other things on their mind, but if you compensate them, it takes money to be successful in the not-for-profit world, because social workers, the people you have running your back office things, and then the programs that you put in front of these people. If young people are interested in acting, taking them to the theater, they're interested in becoming a great athlete, and they have to show. There's one thing I want to mention, and that started on Rikers, and I continued it when I got out. The basic philosophy behind getting out and staying out is you do, then I do. This is not a free ride. This is not, you're going to come in and I'm going to give you money. You have to do something. The first thing they had to do on Rikers was write an essay. Dear Mr. Goldsmith, I want to be in getting out and staying out because, and that essay had to be well written, punctuation and the like. And if they didn't write that essay, they couldn't get in my program. So they come complain, oh, I didn't write the essay, but I want to be in there. I said, guess what? You ain't getting in. That's it. Then when they get out and they came to getting out and staying out, I had a job readiness program. And the program took 2 weeks. There are about 10 different courses, really lectures they had to attend. And once they finished that, they then had to call my office and make an appointment, show up in a shirt and tie with a resume and do a professional interview. They had a million different reasons why they couldn't do it. I was too busy. I was babysitting. I was this, I was that. So I didn't do the essay. Well, then guess what? There's no interview. I held very strongly to the prerequisites that these guys had to go through, like a resume. They never heard of a cover letter. What's a cover letter? So I explained to them what a cover letter was, showed them how to do it, and they had to do it, like it or not. That's the way they got through the program. But all of this costs money. You have the regular costs of an organization, the heat, the electricity, the rent. But we watch our costs very carefully. And going back to those measurements and outcomes, when you take money from a foundation or from the city or even from individuals, you have to issue a report at the end of that period. It's usually a year, exactly how the funds were used and the results that you made. But the results are even more important than the money, because that says to somebody, hey, I did some good here. Something good came of the money that I donated to getting out and staying out.
Interesting enough, that segues into the next question that's in the chat. So were there any times where the return on the investment that you had mentioned, return on investment, didn't yield the anticipated promised results?
Never.
And if so, so the second question is not valid.
I don't know what I would have done if we didn't make our numbers. I really don't, because we made sure we were conservative in what we delivered when we promised to deliver, and we always were over. So the idea is be conservative in what you promise, and then make sure that you achieve your objectives. There was no alternative here. And that maybe that was the business approach that I took. It was kind of like making a profit or making your numbers at the end of the year. If you were a public company, your stock could take a dive if you didn't. If you were private, then it was important that the investors knew. But I never missed a number in 15 years. I'm not sure what I would have done. I guess I would have had to come up with wait a minute. Let me just suggest something. COVID, who knew about COVID? If you had made some projections the year before COVID hit and your clients could not come to your office, that would have been an excuse. Something of that nature where it's just out of your control. And that was an example where we did have to go back to foundations and say we didn't make certain numbers because guys couldn't come to the office. We made up a certain amount by going out and meeting them in the outside. But that was an example when an objective was not made.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I see a lot of the elements of the business of the for-profit experience that spilled into that mindset, right? And speaking of mindset, let's talk about mindset for a section, right? Mindset, we talk a lot about that in a lot of the program that we do here. There's even an entrepreneurial mindset class here at Baruch College. So when you think about mindset, what do you think are some of the things that help you to develop your mindset that has served you well in the profit and the non-for-profit space?
Working my butt off. This is a big one. It's impossible to outwork me. I'm an extremely hard worker, and producing the results when I was in the corporate world, that either my division or a company had promised, or as an entrepreneur when I started the company. So I'm very, very result oriented. Now, that doesn't stop me from being involved in the details of the business, but I think also when problems happen, and problems always happen, how do you solve the problem? Are you a problem solver, or you continue the issue? Example that I gave before about looking for an office in Harlem. I couldn't find an office. Nobody wanted these guys in their building. What was the answer? The answer was a storefront. If I hadn't thought of that, I'm not sure what I would have done. So I think it's the idea of when times are good and products are selling and everybody's succeeding, that's easy. Anybody can do that. It's when failure is lurking or when problems happen. How can you do that? And I think there are a lot of issues that go on today in the marketplace that can cause problems. And I think your ability to solve problems, to me, is the single most important thing that I look for when I hire people, that they'll be creative, that they will work their things off. And you can't outwork me, but you can show up and do what I have suggested. Some people think I'm a benevolent despot and I'm too tough, and I'm like, whatever. But my feeling is always, I always compensated my workers at the highest level competitively in the marketplace, not outrageous pricing for salaries, but at the top of whatever was known in the marketplace. So compensate your employees, treat them well, good benefits, and then get the results. And if you don't get the results, you have a conversation. You give them an opportunity to shape up, or if they don't, they ship out. It's just that simple. It's a little ruthless, but there's objectives here, either from a for-profit point of view or not-for-profit point of view.
Great answer, which segues into the next question from Harvey, where it says non-for-profits and for-profits have the same objectives: bring value to clients and satisfy stakeholders. Main difference source of funds and cash flow. That was the question. So can you speak to that, like the cash flow?
Oh yeah, as far as raising money, there's no question about it. When you raise money for a company to make a profit, you once again are showing potential investors what you can expect from a return on their investment. How much do you anticipate making in a given year? If it's a public company, what do you see that? How do you see that stock performing? It's all based on performance. What sort of performance are you promising an investor that they will be getting? At the same time, in the not-for-profit world, that's where I went back to the measurements and outcomes. We will reduce the recidivism rate from over 65% to under 15. Do you make that number or don't you make that number? We will enroll a minimum of 25 guys in our GED program, and we anticipate a minimum of 15 getting their GED. So we don't overpromise there. Guys are going to drop out. Achieving jobs. We will ensure that so many guys get jobs, and that requires an awful lot of being in the marketplace and finding out the kinds of jobs that these guys are qualified for. And we always look for overachievement. We have them reaching up to raise themselves. But there's one thing, during our job readiness program, we educate them. You stay off the cell phone. You're the first one in the morning and the last one in at night, and we guarantee you'll be promoted. Because what do people do? They come in late, they leave early, and they talk on the phone all day. So if you're not one of those people, if you're one of the people who the boss doesn't have to worry about, you're going to get ahead. Most likely you're going to get ahead. So I think it's, once again, dealing with the differences between the two, asking for results, producing the results, and having satisfied shareholders, if it's part of your stock, or having the satisfaction of seeing a particular population get out from under whatever is causing them not to move forward in the world.
Beautiful. And it's so multifaceted, right? It's like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the individuals that that are in this situation are brilliant. Like you mentioned earlier, some have been dealt a bad hand. And now how do we overcome some of those social emotional things that have to be addressed so that they can be able to be fully present in the program?
And I think also role models are very important. You got a guy like Kyrie Irving in the Nets. We know he's he's probably one of the 10 or 15 best ball players in the NBA, but he's a problem. He's a real problem. And we want our guys, as far as guys are getting out and staying out, not to look up to the Kyrie Irvings of the world, right? But rather look up maybe to somebody. There's so many athletes over the years who have been staunch supporters of good thoughts, involved in the community, involved with kids. I mean, when I had Mariano Rivera, the Yankee relief pitcher, come to GOSO, he spent 3 hours with my guys, and they couldn't believe it. He was so down to earth, and he was such basically a terrific guy. So, and it's not too difficult to find out who the good guys are and who the other guys are. But including in the rap world or in the music world, it's important. One of the famous musicians from the Latino world, John Leguizamo, I don't know if you know his name or not.
Absolutely.
John's married to my wife's best friend. I'm sorry, my daughter's best friend. And John brought 2 shows to Rikers Island, not 1, but 2. And I convinced the correction department to allow him to come in and do 2 different shows on Rikers Island. And then he also emceed one of my benefits and has done a documentary on getting out and staying out. But a great supporter. John Atchison, a famous hairstylist in the Black community, he took on guys as mentors, became their mentor. I had guys work in his salon to learn hairstyling. So once again, it's important that you know how to reach out to these kind of people, because people want to help. They really do. What you have to do is give them an opportunity and then create the atmosphere for it to happen. And I think, as I said at the end of my talk, what happens when you volunteer, you get more than the recipient. You'd think the recipient is the only benefactor of this kind of work. It's not. The satisfaction you get from seeing people succeed who did not succeed before you got a chance to work with them, it's a feeling I can't tell you how strongly I feel about it. And one of the last things we should also talk about is age. I started this agency when I was 66 years old, and I'm 86 now, and still consulting. My wife is 85 years old, runs an agency called New Alternatives for Children that deals with children who have disabilities coming out of hospitals. And as I say, she's 85, runs an agency called New Alternatives for Children, $30 million budget, 450 employees. We're married actually 61 years. So
wow.
She has really been my mentor in the world of not-for-profit.
Which is interesting, you brought your wife. She's essentially the catalyst for this, right?
She's the one who suggested I be principal for the day. And we've always taken each other's suggestions seriously. And if she hadn't suggested it, I never would have gone to Rikers in the first place.
Wow. That just goes to show how sometimes the things that we may think are nominal can actually be exponential.
Absolutely, particularly in this world. The idea to get out and volunteer, how are you going to determine what you want to do? You go volunteer and you spend time. And you find out if this work is exactly where you want to spend your time. I was just thrown into it. I asked for the toughest school in New York and they gave it to me. I got what I asked for. And then I had to deal with it, and it all worked out very well.
Yes. So there's another question that just came in not too long ago, and it speaks to what you was talking about earlier, and it is, how did you define and track the social impact side of your organization? And was there any early phase exploration, trial and error on how to do them?
Well, the number one measurement was recidivism. There was a 65% recidivism rate at Rikers Island when I went in there, and I reduced that recidivism rate to 15%. That's quite phenomenal. These guys succeeded. And there was one other aspect of the program I didn't talk about, and that is what's called up top. When you leave Rikers Island and you do time, you do it up top, upstate prisons. So I developed a correspondence course with these guys in the upstate prisons. There's one guy I've been writing to for 15 years, and I periodically try and get him clemency. It hasn't worked yet, but that upstate program is very important at getting out and staying out. We have people who visit guys upstate and also correspond with them, because when you're locked out upstate, it's not comfortable. I watched one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, the other night with Morgan Freeman. It's wonderful, and Tim Robbins, about a guy who had been in upstate prison. But those measurements and that showing exactly what you're doing and how it's affecting GED. These guys at Rikers, for the most part, never finished high school. So when at Rikers, we had a very good school run by a principal named Gloria Ortiz. She founded the school, and she's the one who actually invited me back to Rikers to work with her students. But the whole education idea, these kids never thought they didn't, for the worst part is they didn't think they were smart enough, and they were easily smart enough. Nobody had spent the time with them and let them show them how to study, how to spend time, and how to get their GED, and then go on to college. I went to Pace College to visit a graduation where I had met a guy. He had been up top for a while. He got out, took college courses upstate, and graduated from Pace College. My wife and I, Bard College, and we went to his graduation. And I've been to quite a few of them.
Those are beautiful stories. Those are the things that stand the test of time, right? To see someone go from lack of belief to actually accomplishing a goal, because it just builds on itself.
Well, the sad part is they don't realize how smart they are. They've bought into society's thing that they're stupid. They think that they're not capable of doing it, and that's why they end up selling drugs and doing stupid things, because they don't realize they have the brain power to do well in school. Just the GED, you don't have to get a high school diploma, but the difference between looking for a job with a GED and not having a GED is night and day. And what you do there is you put that money in front of them and say, listen, without a GED, you're going to be making $10,000, $20,000 a year for the rest of your life. And if that's okay with you, fine. But if you want to do better, you must get that high school diploma one way or another so that you can compete in the marketplace. And then, of course, once you get the job, the idea of being in there early, leaving late, not using the cell phone, the power of that, they don't believe until they do it. And then they'll call me, hey, MG, guess what happened? What happened? I got promoted. What do you mean you got promoted? He said, well, I just got promoted over all the guys in my group. Why? Because he was first one in, last one out. That was it.
Wow. Last question, as we bring it to end, we have to talk about the book. And one of the questions in the chat was, how did the community respond and react to the book?
I think very well. I've given lectures and tours, and it's really, once again, they're recognizing that an older fella, 66 years old, could actually make that move from the corporate world to the social entrepreneurship world and continue at it for over 15 years. One of the reasons I did it is I don't know what these people do when they retire. I really don't. How much golf can you play? You know? How much television can you watch before you realize that you really need something else in your life? So particularly with COVID, a lot of people have been retired before they really wanted to retire. And this is an opportunity for retired people. As I say, I started this at 66. They don't have to go that far, but there's no reason why you can't volunteer for certainly your 60s, 70s, 80s, and I'm sure maybe even 90s. The opportunities are out there, and I have a feeling a lot more people are bored to death than we recognize. And I think once that sets in, then dementia sets in, then your mind starts to be, not in gear anymore, and pretty soon you're just vegging out in front of the TV set. And I don't think that's the way people really want to spend the last 20 years of their life. So I'm hoping that more people will read it, get enthused by it, and find something to do.
That's a great way to close. And speaking of the book, we have copies of the book that we don't have a lot. We're gonna raffle off some copies of the book that Mark sent to us and signed. Are they signed?
Absolutely.
And they're signed. So we have those. So we have a limited number. You guys are gonna get follow-up details about the book and how we're gonna raffle it off for you guys. Mark, thank you for being with us today. I want to thank you for spending the time presenting, just from one alumni to the next. Thank you.
Amen.
So thank you all for participating.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
So I want to thank everyone for participating as well. Please be on the lookout for our follow-up email with today's recording, and get ready for our last Lunch and Learn, which is going to be December 7th. And the name of that Lunch and Learn is going to be Small Business Health, How New Policies, Investments Impact Small Businesses and Their Employees. Thank you and have a good day.